Adolf Hitler has risen to power pretending to be a man of peace. He tells his people he can make Germany great again, without war. But behind the scenes, he's locked in a fierce battle with his generals. They believe he's hell-bent on a suicidal war of territorial expansion. Some are even plotting to kill him. This is the story of how Hitler lies to his people, outmaneuvers his generals, and leads Germany into a catastrophic war. On a bleak winter's day in late 1937, Adolf Hitler summons Germany's military leaders to a meeting at his headquarters. Present are such senior figures as General Werner von Blumberg, Germany's Minister for War, and General Werner von Fritsch, Commander-in-Chief of the Army.
They think this is going to be a routine meeting. But Hitler shocks them at the beginning of the meeting by explaining to them that what he's about to tell them should be considered his last will and testament. Hitler then goes on to explain his plans for military expansion.
Step 1. Unite the German-speaking people. Many of them incorporated into countries like Austria and Czechoslovakia in the carve-up of Europe after World War I. Step 2. Move east and seize territory in Poland, Ukraine and Russia so that the German people can have extra living space or Lebensraum. It's a dream he's been nursing for nearly 20 years. Many of Germany's generals agree with him. But then Hitler spells out his timetable. German troops should seize Austria and Czechoslovakia, possibly in less than a year. The countries further east would rapidly follow over the next few years. It's a hugely ambitious program. The assembled generals are alarmed. Europe's frontiers are formally guaranteed by the military might of Britain and France. To his military commanders, Hitler seems to be rushing the country into a suicidal war.
And when they leave the meeting, there is considerable distrust and disquiet. What really worried them was that they didn't believe that the German army, that the German armed forces at that stage in late 1937, early 1938, were ready for war. Indeed, they thought that they were woefully unprepared. And it was decided that one or two of them, at least, should make their views known to Hitler.
One of those who agrees to talk to Hitler is Werner von Blumberg.
Field Marshal von Blumberg was very much of the old school of the German army.
Blomberg is actually quite a pro-Hitler general. He's always seen as rather sort of sympathetic to the Nazis.
But even he has been shocked by what Hitler has said to him that day and was beginning to tire of Hitler's expansionist plans.
He's joined by Werner von Fritsch, also horrified by what he's heard. But Hitler refuses to listen to them.
Hitler was having none of it. And there's no doubt that at that moment he started to doubt their support and to doubt whether he could carry out his plans with them still in place.
As the two men will soon find out, Hitler has a way of dealing with those who oppose him. In the Berlin offices of the Gestapo, an agent combs through the police files. His target is not communists or dissidents. It's von Blomberg. Very soon, the agent finds what he's looking for. The file on Werner von Blomberg shows the general has a dark secret. He's recently remarried. Hitler had been one of the witnesses.
She was considerably younger than him, and it's clear that at some stage he was smitten, he fell in love, and he decided that he wanted to marry her. She was only 25 years old.
But Blomberg's new wife has a secret and colourful past.
She was not only a former prostitute, but had also posed for some pornographic pictures in her past.
The file reveals that she has been a regular fixture at Berlin's sleazy nightclubs and bars. She's a totally unsuitable wife for a senior military figure. The file is sent to Hitler. Hitler, a notorious prude, is appalled.
There was an anecdote going round Berlin at the time that Hitler was washing almost compulsively because he had shaken this lady's hand. But at the same time, it chimed very neatly with Hitler's desire to get rid of von Blomberg, to do away with some of the opposition to his military plans, which he now had in place.
Blomberg is summoned to a meeting and offered a choice. Resign, or his wife's past will be made public. As Hitler had hoped, he chooses to resign. Days later, Werner von Fritsch is also summoned to a meeting with the Führer. A file has mysteriously surfaced, suggesting Fritsch has had a homosexual liaison.
Homosexuality to the Nazis was something that was absolutely abhorrent. And for Hitler personally, who was tremendously homophobic, it was utterly beyond the pale.
Fritsch, too, is forced to resign. Almost immediately, Hitler abolishes the position of war minister and appoints himself supreme commander of the German army.
Hitler actually emerges in much firmer control of the German military than he had been the previous autumn. The army has basically become much more his creature. It's much more subordinated to his will. Any remaining independence of action that it had has been effectively removed.
Yet Hitler faces an obstacle. The German public has elected him as a man of peace. How can he fulfill his expansionist plans, seize new territory, and still keep his promise to them? In the spring of 1938, Hitler launches Phase 1 of his expansionist plans. German troops pour across the border into Austria. They're greeted by cheering crowds.
The Austrians welcomed Hitler and the Nazis into Austria. Many millions of them were Germans by birth, German by upbringing, and they were only too happy to return back to the Reich.
Within days, Hitler arrives in Vienna to claim Austria for his new Greater Germany.
There are wonderful photographs of him addressing 250,300,000 people in the Heldenplatz, the Square of Heroes in the middle of Vienna.
Annexing Austria, even peacefully, is a blatant breach of all international agreements. Yet Britain and France do nothing. Hitler has judged the situation very skillfully. He's gambled on their reluctance to go to war, and won. In Germany, there's also jubilation. Hitler has taken the first step in creating his Greater Germany without bloodshed. In doing so, he's also kept his promise to his people not to take the country to war. The Nazi propaganda machine pumps up the achievement.
The crowds were euphoric. They saw this as being a bloodless invasion that, almost without a shot being fired, Hitler had reintroduced Austria back into a Greater Germany. He was a hero at the time.
Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's propaganda minister and close confidant, speaks for many when he writes,
"The Führer is wonderful, a real genius. He sits over maps for hours and broods. It's stirring when he says he wishes to live to see the Greater Germanic Reich again."
Yet behind the scenes, Hitler and some of his closest collaborators are planning another aggressive expansion of Germany's borders. Five months after the annexation of Austria, Hitler masses troops on the border with Czechoslovakia and threatens an invasion.
Discover the past with exclusive military history documentaries and ad-free podcasts presented by world-renowned historians, all on History Hit. Watch them on your smart TV or on the go with your mobile device. Download the app now to watch everything, from the gripping story of the Band of Brothers to Operation Barbarossa and D-Day. Immerse yourself in the dramatic stories of this remarkable era by signing up via the link in the description.
The country has a large German minority. Most of them live in a border area known as the Sudetenland. They are the next target on Hitler's shopping list for incorporation into a new Greater Germany.
He felt that the German people had the right to live together in one large nation state. Hitler simply believed this was an entirely natural and just cause, and he had absolutely no hesitation in making this the centerpiece of his foreign policy.
But unlike the Austrians, the Czechs aren't willing to give up territory to Germany. Furthermore, Czech sovereignty is guaranteed by France and supported by Britain. Hitler needs to somehow maintain the illusion to the German people that he's a man of peace. If there is conflict, it shouldn't be seen to be of his making. The job falls to Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's propaganda minister. The Nazi propaganda machine swings into action. Newsreels show the Sudeten Germans as a people yearning to become a part of Greater Germany.
There had been a vigorous propaganda campaign beforehand to suggest that these people were persecuted in the Czech state, that they were not given equal rights, and that their legitimate popular wish to become part of Germany was being denied.
Hitler was very clever at telling the world, and of course telling his own people in particular, how badly oppressed the Germans living within the Sudeten borders were, and that this was really a moral crusade for Germany.
Hitler's Nazi sympathizers in the Sudetenland now secretly stir up trouble.
There was a very effective grouping of Nazis, pro-Nazis, who were able to magnify any incident of oppression suffered by the Germans.
It's a classic Nazi trick. Secretly provoke unrest, then make sure it gets lots of news coverage.
Every newsreel carried an example of the oppression of the German people in the Sudetenland. Our people, our German brothers and sisters, are being oppressed in an appalling way in the Sudetenland. This can't be allowed to continue. We must intervene. And the anger that was built up was very effective propaganda.
It's a clever spin. Hitler can now put the army on a war footing while claiming he's merely protecting a helpless, undefended German population. But despite his popularity, Hitler still feels insecure. That summer, Hitler takes another step to reinforce his position.
He had this fear that although the army was sworn to him by an oath of loyalty, you could never trust everybody on every occasion.
What he needs is an alternative source of military power, and he knows just where to find it. The Waffen SS is the armed paramilitary wing of the Nazi Party.
The men who joined the Waffen SS were fanatical Nazis, and they also had to meet the SS criterion. They were tall and blonde-haired and had to show that they're of pure Nordic blood for at least 3 generations. They had to swear allegiance to Adolf Hitler. They had to have their blood group tattooed on their arms. They had to have read Mein Kampf. They really had no compunction about what they did and who they killed, as long as it was followed the Nazi ideology. Ordinary Germans and ordinary German soldiers would be scared of these guys.
That summer, the ranks of the Waffen SS are rapidly expanded. New recruits pour in.
In 1938, the Waffen SS set up its own training schools. This gave them access to better equipment and better training. It also welded them together as a unique elite corps, which were fanatically devoted to Nazism and to the extermination of communists and Jews.
They were special, they were separate, and they were answerable only to themselves and to the Führer, with no reference to any other authority over them. That's what gives them that fearful image.
They are, in effect, Hitler's private army. His guarantee that if the army turns against him, he has an alternative source of power. It will turn out to be a wise precaution. There's already a growing revolt inside the military. Late that summer, at a cathedral in the German capital, an extraordinary scene is unfolding. A group of military officers have come to ask the cathedral's canon to release them from their oaths of loyalty to the Führer. A Among them is Hans Oster, a colonel in German military intelligence. He'd been an early supporter of the Nazis. But now, like the rest of the group, he believes Hitler is rushing the country into a suicidal war. The cathedral canon, also a dissident, is happy to help. He tells them Hitler is a tyrant and that they have no obligation to follow him.
And that was a difficult step for many of those senior military men to make. This was, after all, their commander-in-chief, so they needed, if you like, absolution from the church to prepare them for what they were planning to do.
The conspirators also have the backing of important names in the German military. They include General Erwin von Witzelbahn, commander of the army in Berlin, and Fritz von Schulenburg, vice president of the Berlin police. Both have been deeply disturbed by Hitler's removal of Blumberg and Fritsch and his willingness to risk war with Britain and France.
Many of those who were plotting in the summer of 1938 were those that you might normally imagine were the Nazis' natural echelon of supporters. There were senior military personnel, also senior police personnel. And many of them had initially been supporters of Hitler and the Nazis, but they feel they're being railroaded into reckless foreign policy adventures.
Oster and his colleagues leave the cathedral determined to do all they can to stop Hitler. Over the next few months, the conspirators lay their plans. The idea is to arrest Hitler and remove him from power. They tour Berlin, studying places where they might seize him. The big, outstanding question: when should they act? Meanwhile, on the Czech border, German troops continue to prepare for war. But France and Britain are still guarantors of Czech sovereignty. Yet, even now, Hitler sticks to his claim that he doesn't want war. In a speech to the German people that September, he proclaims,
"I demand that the oppression of these Germans in Czechoslovakia ceases."
Hitler had a very successful technique where he presented himself as a man of peace. He always said he was a former frontline soldier. Why would he, of all people, want a renewal of war? But he presented himself always as a man under great pressure from his own people and from the minorities he was seeking to rescue.
the clock is ticking. War seems imminent. Will the invasion of Czechoslovakia go ahead? Or can the conspirators inside the army stop Hitler before he drags Germany into a reckless war? Suddenly, there's a dramatic new development. In Britain, Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain has been watching Hitler's saber rattling with alarm. He now leaves London for a meeting with Hitler.
Discussion between him and me may have useful consequences.
On the morning that he left for Germany, he was sent off from the airport by cheering crowds.
In Germany, Chamberlain is received by Hitler at the Berghof, his mountain retreat in the German Alps.
Chamberlain and Hitler are very different figures. They're 20 years apart. Chamberlain is 69, Hitler is 49.
Chamberlain must have cut a fairly strange figure amongst all these Germans in their Nazi uniforms, with his wing collar, his tie, his rolled-up umbrella.
Chamberlain very much looks like a statesman of the old school, and of course Hitler's a very different beast indeed.
It was the meeting of two cultures, the old Edwardian school of British diplomacy, represented by Chamberlain, and this new aggressive Nazi German movement.
As if to symbolize the significance of the meeting, a thunderstorm breaks overhead.
That day, there was a storm brewing, appropriately enough, and boy was there going to be a storm brewing that day.
Chamberlain is, as many were when they first met Hitler, he's impressed by the charisma, the personality, the character of the man. And that, of course, carries Hitler a long way forward to getting what he wants.
Hitler, once again, presents himself as a man of peace, simply trying to help his fellow Germans. He demands the Sudetenland be given a vote on whether it should secede from Czechoslovakia. Chamberlain appears to accept the argument and agrees to try and sell it to the French and Czech governments. But he leaves a poor impression on his German hosts.
After Chamberlain had left that evening, there was much hilarity amongst the staff and the other people at the Berghof about Chamberlain. There's no doubt that the Germans felt, having met him once, that this was a man who they could get the better of.
In Berlin, Hans Oster and his fellow conspirators are not taken in by Hitler's presentation of himself as a man of peace. They plan their next moves.
To make sure they weren't followed, they went to some quite extraordinary lengths. They used to go for walks together in the park so they could see that nobody was following them. One group of plotters even used to meet in a Berlin swimming pool so they could make sure that any potential Gestapo tail was left in the changing room.
One important question remains unresolved. What to do with Hitler once he's arrested? Most favor a trial, but not everybody agrees. One of them is Major Friedrich Wilhelm Heinz, a former right-wing thug.
Friedrich Wilhelm Heinz had a colourful background. He'd been through First World War and subsequently fought in every radical right-wing paramilitary organisation of the 1920s.
Heinz supports the Nazi cause, but not Hitler's leadership of it. He tells Oster, by now the leading spirit behind the rebellion,
Hitler alive is stronger than all our divisions. He needs to be killed.
The two men come to a secret understanding. Hitler will be shot in the confusion of the arrest. There is now a very real chance Hitler could be killed. Five days after his first trip to see Hitler, Chamberlain returns to Germany. The second meeting is held in the small spa town of Bad Godesberg on the Rhine. Chamberlain's hotel, the Petersburg, is on one side of the river. Hitler stays in his favorite, the Driessen, on the other.
The Driessen is the hotel where Hitler traditionally went to relax, where he used to go to stay when he wanted a holiday. Herr Driessen, the owner of the hotel, was famous as being an arch-Nazi. And he had an interesting sideline. Whenever Hitler came to stay, he would then auction off all of the materials that had been in Hitler's room afterwards to earn a bit of extra money.
As the meeting gets underway, Chamberlain is optimistic. He tells Hitler he's got the deal he wants. Britain has persuaded the French and Czech governments to accept the German demand that the Sudetenland be given a vote on whether to become part of Germany. War can be avoided.
And then, having done so, he sort of leant back in his chair as if to say, haven't I done well? And to his horror, and to the horror of the other people in the room, Hitler thumped the table and he said, no, I'm afraid the rules have changed. I'm afraid that is no longer enough.
He would sort of display these incredible histrionics and theatrics, and his mouth would foam with rage.
Hitler tells an astonished Chamberlain he's no longer interested in a vote.
And it's at this point where he's famously called a carpet biter, because he's like a sort of a rabid dog.
Hitler now tells Chamberlain the situation in the Sudetenland has deteriorated. Hundreds of fellow Germans are being killed almost daily. Forget the vote. He will invade unless the Czechs hand over the Sudetenland to Germany immediately.
And at that point, Chamberlain, literally, his mouth just drops open. And he sits up, and he's absolutely shocked by what Hitler said. Because it means that they haven't just gone back to square one, they've gone back to the square before that.
At that stage, things looked very bad indeed.
Hitler now ramps up the pressure on Chamberlain. A carefully orchestrated stream of messengers come and go.
A courier comes in and presents, with a great flourish, a piece of paper to Hitler. It tells Hitler and Chamberlain that 300 Germans have been massacred in a battle in the German Sudetenland. In fact, of course, it hadn't happened at all. It was a complete myth. But it was Hitler's way of really turning the screw onto Chamberlain.
And he'd bang the table in front of Chamberlain and say, "The urgency is evident, Mr. Prime Minister." And Chamberlain really didn't know how to respond. I mean, he had to believe the stories. He couldn't say, well, I think it's propaganda. He was duped, if you wish, by a much smarter operator.
The meeting finishes late. Chamberlain returns home deeply disturbed. He's facing a monumental choice. He has to persuade the world that Hitler has a legitimate right to walk into the Sudetenland, or take Britain to war. He soon makes his opinions clear. He tells the House of Commons, in a now infamous phrase, Hitler's threatened invasion of the Sudetenland is merely a quarrel in a faraway country between people of whom we know nothing. In Berlin, the conspirators in the army are certain Hitler is still leading the country to war. They can't believe the British will give in to Hitler's latest demand. Desperate to stop him, they finalize their plans. The invasion may be only days away. At an army garrison in Berlin, Friedrich Wilhelm Heinz assembles a small team. The plan is to arrest Hitler as soon as he's ordered the invasion of the Sudetenland. Arms, ammunition, and hand grenades are handed out. The conspirators check their weapons. But then something happens they hadn't anticipated. Europe's great powers, Britain, France, Germany, and Italy, gather in Munich for a final attempt to thrash out a solution to the Sudeten crisis. The meeting is held at the Führerbad, the enormous Nazi headquarters in Munich.
The atmosphere at Munich was tense throughout.
Everybody present is convinced time is running out to prevent the second catastrophic war in Europe in 20 years. But Hitler stands firm. Even now, he maintains his public image that he doesn't want war, but that he's being pushed into it by the Czechs. Across Germany, there's a mood of alarm that despite their faith in him, Hitler is going to break his promise.
The reality was, and we know this from diary entries, that there were serious doubts, not simply among the military, but also among ordinary Germans. It wasn't openly expressed because really there wasn't an open area for that, but the anxieties are there.
There's a lot of trepidation now amongst the people. They're quite frightened of coming out and saying, you know, these aims are wrong, but there is a kind of fear about a world war and what it will do for Germany.
Peace in Europe hangs by a thread. Then Chamberlain offers a new, extraordinary compromise. Hitler can have the Sudetenland, provided he promises this will be the last of his territorial ambitions. Hitler immediately replies,
Yes, yes, it's the last territorial demand I shall make in Europe.
Within hours, the Munich Agreement is signed. It's an extraordinary coup. Chamberlain is convinced war has been avoided. For Hitler, it's a double triumph. Germany's borders have again been expanded. And he can continue his lie that he's a man of peace. Once again, he's a national hero. In Berlin, the secret conspiracy against Hitler collapses. Hans Oster and his colleagues burn all the evidence. With Chamberlain's climb down, they've lost heart. The leadership melts back into the army command structure. Hans Oster, the leader of the conspiracy, hides his opposition and remains a colonel in the German military intelligence. Friedrich Wilhelm Heinz, who had wanted to shoot Hitler, joins a special forces group and will fight on the Eastern Front. General Erwin von Witzelbahn is promoted to commander-in-chief of an army group. Fritz von Schulenburg also throws in his lot with the military establishment and is later promoted. Their loss of courage means Hitler is now free to move on to the next phase of his expansionist plans. Six months after signing the Munich Agreement, he tears it up. In March 1939, German troops roar straight through the Sudetenland and occupy the whole of Czechoslovakia. This is no longer merely uniting German-speaking people. This is territorial expansion. Yet even so, Britain and France are still unwilling to go to war. For the German people, it looks like another amazing triumph. Across Germany, there's renewed euphoria. Germany has acquired not just the Sudetenland, but the whole of Czechoslovakia, without firing a shot. It's Hitler's first step in his acquisition of Lebensraum, the extra living space he's promised the German people.
It's a long-standing notion, going back to the 19th century, which was that Germany didn't have enough space for its people.
Hitler's popularity soars to new heights.
He had proved yet again that he could take risks. They were calculated risks, but they'd been so cleverly well calculated, they actually worked.
To many people, he's the country's greatest diplomat ever. There's an outpouring of adulatory letters and poems. A 17-year-old girl writes,
Hitler is a great man, a genius, a person sent to us from heaven.
One Western newspaper reports, the great majority of Germans could now find some point of identification with Hitler and his achievements. What the German people don't know is that this will be Hitler's last major bloodless victory.
The international community was outraged by it. Stalin denounced him, Chamberlain denounced him, and the French denounced him. Hitler is hell-bent on war. The only way to stop him is through a powerful military alliance.
But even now, the German people have faith he won't take them to war. They're wrong. At the beginning of September, a German warship in the free port of Danzig opens fire on the Polish garrison. Meanwhile, German troops pour across the border into Poland. This time, Britain and France react. Both countries are signatories of a treaty guaranteeing Polish independence. They now have no choice but to come to Poland's assistance. On September the 3rd, 1939, 2 days after the German invasion, Britain and France declare war on Germany.
This country is at war with Germany.
What Hitler has promised will not happen has happened. World War II has begun. In Germany, there's a mood of fear and doom.
There was no appetite amongst the German people for what could be seen as a resumption of the First World War, which had been utterly catastrophic for Germany. From contemporary reports, we know that the mood in Berlin was somber and depressed.
The war they'd hoped to avoid has finally arrived. But then, very rapidly, the mood changes as German forces crush all opposition. Poland is overrun in weeks. The German army then turns west. War spreads across Europe. It's accompanied by more easy victories. Germany occupies Denmark and Norway.
I mean, this is joined-up warfare. This is tanks, artillery, all working in unison.
Soon afterwards, German forces storm into Belgium and Holland.
This is a war that no one has ever seen before, and it's absolutely devastating. This is war at its most brutal.
By midsummer 1940, Hitler is in Paris at the head of a victorious army. He has defeated the combined forces of both Britain and France. In front of the Eiffel Tower, he proclaims,
"I'm the greatest strategic genius of all time."
Many Germans who had begun to doubt him start to trust Hitler again. In a matter of months, and with minimal losses, Germany has overrun Europe. Hitler may not have kept his promise to avoid war, but at least it's been a brief one. He's grabbed more territory than the Germans had won in the entire course of World War I. A war that lasted 4 years and cost millions of German lives. He tells his senior military commanders,
"No one has achieved what I have achieved. I've led the German people to a great height."
The idea of Hitler's military brilliance spreads across the world. National leaders in Europe and Asia rally to his support. That summer, Italy enters the war on the German side. Hitler and the Italian fascist leader Benito Mussolini have much in common.
Hitler, from the beginning, admired what he called the great man across the Alps. And it's reciprocated. Mussolini admires Hitler for what he's achieved.
In the autumn, Germany's old ally Japan also joins Hitler. The Axis powers are born. Hitler strides the world. Yet what the Germans don't realize is that the war is far from over. The devastation is only just beginning.